What is he doing? Oh, I see. He doesn't understand the work. Off he goes. Wait, no, here he comes again. Well, at least he's persistent in trying to understand. Hi, Al. What's the matter, buddy? That's sort of what I figured. It's kind of hard to determine how something like this fits into art when we think of art in such specific ways, isn't it? Yeah, I can help you understand. Actually, it's quite easy. At least conceptually it is. You see, Al, cause and effect formal analysis is only the start of truly understanding art. Complex or abnormal pieces such as these can be much harder, but there is a technique that can help you to understand these works and open discourse about them that might otherwise elude you. This is the concept of ICU. Oh no, Al, not that ICU. This is the concept of intensity, complexity, and unity in art. By using these categories and making logic-based judgments about how artworks fit into these categories, we can then determine ideas about the various works' aesthetic goodness. Though this is not a catch-all solution, rather it is a way for us to better understand how difficult works fit into the grand scheme of things. This way of thinking about art stems from a theory developed in 1958 by the art philosopher Monroe Beardsley. Beardsley created an elegant and practical aesthetic framework for discussing artwork by analyzing the work through the lenses of three broad categories. These were intensity, complexity, and unity. Beardsley's framework is still used today when analyzing art, but it has since been expanded upon, especially since contemporary work is more pluralistic and rhizomatic than when the philosophy was first developed. Oh, sorry, Al. What I mean by contemporary work being pluralistic and rhizomatic is that it embodies many different things. It spreads out and takes on various processes, meanings, themes, genres, and more. It's a hybrid of many different things and cannot be easily defined in a singular way. Make sense? Good. So this was the problem with Beardsley's theory. His original explanation of the ICU categories was simply this short list describing each category, and it included no visuals for supporting his descriptions. This worked well as a basis, but in the postmodern era that followed the theory's publication, such a list was too limiting. Thus, the framework needed to be expanded upon, and that is what we're going to talk about today, a way in which ICU theory can be applied in the 21st century. So how do we define these categories for the 21st century? With a dictionary. Really, Al? That was just bad. I cannot believe you're proud of that. Okay, now back to our lesson. Defining these categories is not a simple task. Rather, it is a list of criteria that are possibilities to look for. Some may exist, some may not, depending on the work you are analyzing. Adding to the list is okay, as the lists must expand over time to better define works that defy explanation. Likewise, not having aspects of the list are not necessarily bad. For example, complexity is generally desired in a work of art. It adds to the work's aestheticism. However, not having complexity can be equally powerful, depending on the context of the work. So, in one case it may be desired and in another it may not be. Neither is wrong, the list is simply to help guide us in making different mental leaps about the work in general. Only after we have examined it in this way can we determine whether the lack of or inclusion of these various aspects helps or hurts the piece overall. Even then, this judgment is based purely on personal perception. Remember, art analysis is a qualitative exercise, not a quantitative. There is only evidence which suggests that our assumptions are correct, not that defines them solidly. Of the three categories, complexity and unity are likely to be the easiest to understand. We deal with these concepts regularly in our creation of and analysis of art. These are concepts tied to the formal qualities of the work, but we are going to try and define them in a way that goes beyond just this surface analysis. Intensity is an altogether different lens to look at art through. Intensity can be thought of as the vitality of a work. In essence, it makes us look twice, or revisit a work mentally, asking why, how, what, etc. That's right, just like the Duchamp piece you were looking at. You kept re-looking at it. trying to decide why and how it fit in with the rest of the work here. That is intensity. It drives us to think about the work we are analyzing, and in my opinion, it is essential to a good piece of art. So let's start there then. Here is a look at the expanded definitions of what constitutes intensity in artwork. In the expanded ICU definitions, qualities such as perceptual shifting, innovative recontextualization, gamesmanship, and sublimity are among many other possible qualities of intensity. These can be very interesting aspects of difficult works to define and can often lead to unexpected discoveries. For our purposes, let's try and define this Duchamp piece together. This is an example of one of Duchamp's ready-mades, titled In Advance of the Broken Arm. This work dates to August of 1964. It's actually the fourth version after the original was lost in November of 1915. This is a recurring theme with Duchamp's ready-mades. Yours is the original. That's not possible. Oh, of course. Well, that makes perfect sense. It was discovered in the lost and found box in the basement alongside an old violin. Well, okay then. Truthfully, the more time I spend in this museum, the more I start to believe anything is possible. Anyway, back to our analysis. Let's look at the work in context with the expanded definitions of intensity. Take a moment to see what you think relates to this piece, and I'll do the same. Okay, here are the traits I see as fitting our work. Do you agree? Good. Okay, so let's quickly discuss why these apply to the piece. There is a perceptual shift in this work because it is perceived in two distinct ways. The first is the most obvious, and that is the object's original intent. It's a snow shovel. We know that immediately. However, it is also an artwork. We know this because it is placed in a formal setting, with the same reverence as the works around it. Thus, there is a constant shift between what is and what it was. This adds to its intensity. The work is also anti-aesthetic, but it has aesthetic qualities that can be seen due to its formalization. This is a Dadaist trait, which makes sense as this is a Dadaist work. It is only after the formalization of the object into a work of art that we pay attention to its aesthetic quality. For example, the color harmony throughout, or the curve of the metal accented by the reinforcing ridges, this verticality of which is contrasted by the horizontal lip of the shovel. You see, there is a shift in the object's aestheticism after being declared art. The work contextualizes itself. It takes the idea of a snow shovel and changes its purpose and meaning completely. Likewise, it is ambiguous. It is almost absurd in its inclusion among classical sculpture, and this too adds to the work's intensity. The list goes on and on. It is distinctly recognizable as a Duchamp ready-made. It was innovative for its time. It plays with intellectual gamesmanship, asking us to reevaluate the value of such objects in a humorous way. And of course, there are many other possibilities. Regardless of those, however, this work is very intense. It makes us think about it, whether negatively or positively. We keep returning to it as a result. Let's move on to some other works to further explore this idea of ICU theory. This not only gives us practice, but defining the next two aspects of ICU theory is easier when the work you're analyzing isn't a snow shovel. Complexity in artwork is the tendency toward many parts and/or qualities in intricate arrangement and contradiction. It is essentially variety among the formal elements of a work. Complexity connects to a viewer's intelligence and visceral feelings, allowing for a cognitive and gut-level appreciation of the art. Such works remain dynamic and test us in many ways. Simply put, unity is the opposition to this. It is the aspect that holds compositions together. It connects the elements within a work and allows the viewer entry into the work through ease of understanding, logic, and harmony. Having elements of both of these in a work helps to balance the work. The mixture of these traits, tempered with the intensity of the work, can greatly impact the reactions of the viewer and help us to understand the purpose and success of almost any work. Let's first start with the expanded definitions of complexity. Again, these are more guidelines than definitions, and they can be expanded upon or eliminated as necessary. Now let's take that list and place it next to an artwork. How about this one here? This piece is titled, never mind, it's listed as Untitled Number 1 by Larry Pittman. What traits do we see from our list that apply to this work? Well, I see a lot of variation, of course, on the formal level. There is also a nice level of complexity between small and large variations throughout the work. As for compositional intricacies, This is a bit more subjective. I would argue that it is tightly composed because there is a pyramidal scheme in place between the man, the woman, and the enlarged screw in the lower right corner. However, this may or may not be how you perceive things. Fair enough. See, this is why these are only guidelines to help us, not hard set rules. Of course, we have a lot of contrast and elemental variety, and even some progression within the elements as well. There is a definite hierarchy to the work, and it is asymmetrically balanced. I would, however, say that the work is subjective when it comes to colors, though, with it containing elements of both dissonance and consonance in the work's color palette. With the work being analyzed for complexity, let's flip over and look at how the expanded definitions of unity might apply to this work. Like with complexity, many of these traits can be applied to the work. For example, the painting contains strong pictorial thrusts to guide our eye through the composition. It also uses merging forms, where one element melts into another. Pattern is heavily used in Pittman's work, as is rhythm and repetition. There is a very obvious enclosure in the connection between the two figures and the visual thrust that takes us along the row of screws that border the bottom of the composition. I would say, too, that there are a great deal of joining threads that bind the elements of the composition together. As before, more definitions could be added depending on our own thoughts. So, you see, Al? This is a practice in analyzing the intensity of the work, the complexity of the work, and the unity of the work, and then asking yourself how each of these elements play off of one another. After this, breaking down complex works can be made easier because you have a framework on which to base your assessments. Does that make sense? Wonderful. I hope that helps you in the future, Al. Al, what are you doing? No, Al, this does not make you the new Duchamp. This makes you a flea market vendor. I think we need to have another lesson.